Hi there, I'm Nocnica, and I am going to give my quick talk for CodeLand. Let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So this talk is called From Tech Support to Development. And about me, my name is Nocnica. I specialize in, I'm going to turn off the camera so I don't look too strange. I specialize in serverless and other containerized development. You can find me on Twitter at serverless_mom or on Twitch at serverlessmom. I work in developer relations currently, and we're going to talk about that, about the path that I took from development to there as well. Okay, camera back on. There's my face, and let's go on to the next slide. So this is a talk about getting a job that reflects your worth, that pays you and remunerates you in a way that sort of more accurately reflects the worth that you have. But you cannot find a job that pays you as much as you are worth. Now, why is that? Okay, so let's talk about what is capitalism, right? Capitalism, right, is a social economic system in which a small group owns the means of production, right? They own the factories, they own the property, they own the companies, the patents, the intellectual property, what have you, and workers that are a necessary part of that production only own their labor, which is generally replaceable, and they're at a disadvantage as individuals. Now, you could be pro-capitalist or anti-capitalist, but a pro-capitalist take is just going to say, hey, this is fine. It's not going to say, hey, this isn't true, right? Because the fact is, since you don't own the complete means of your production, you're always going to be paid a part of what your labor is worth. You're not going to be paid all of it. And so, you know, let's just admit that that's the case. If you're producing $1 million software, you're very likely to be making some fraction of that. So, getting that out of the way, there is one other important point to cover, which is that discrimination is real. So, while this is a talk about going on career pursuits, finding better jobs, and how you might be able to do that, the fact is that I benefit from discrimination as a white woman, and that is just part of the reality of my life. And so, you know, if you, again, I do not think it is possible to say, hey, I don't think that discrimination is real. Right now, every major tech company, the so-called FANG tech companies, and then sort of the list down below that, is the subject of a discrimination lawsuit, and those lawsuits are the tip of the iceberg, right? When we see a thread like this here, which I, sadly, because it's a quick talk, I don't have time to completely read through, but feel free to grab the slides afterwards and take a look at it. This behavior, which was at Google, where essentially people from historically black colleges and universities were kicked out of the interview process immediately, often on first blush as, oh, that's not a college I recognize. That was going on for years at Google, and has not resulted in any legal action whatsoever. So the stuff you see that's legal action is just the tip of the iceberg about discrimination. So good advice can help you get a better job. Good advice cannot cure discrimination that is endemic to the industry, okay? So why can't we, the people applying to jobs, trying to get jobs, solve that problem? Again, capitalism is a system of oppression, right? You're part of the system whether you like it or not. It is necessary for capitalism that the choice be either work or starve, right? So we can't just say, oh, I'm not going to work. And workers are at the mercy of their bosses, right? You don't control the means of production, which means that you have to do what your boss says. You may have, you know, employee surveys, you may be able to vote with your feet, but that kind of pressure is limited, right? You're not able to completely control what happens at the office. So we can't cure discrimination on our own. But anyway, let's get on and talk about my path in development. Okay, here's my path. How are we doing on time? Doing great. I went from tech support to becoming a full-time developer, then experienced a major failure, and then moved on into developer relations. And when you put it like that, it doesn't seem that great, but I promise it's actually a pretty life-affirming, pretty great path that I took. But yeah, that's the very short version. So let's talk about part one, doing too much. So I started out working in tech support. So I started out right at sort of the bottom of tech support for a software company, where I was taking phone calls directly from users who needed their username and password reset. I moved up into working for a software as a service company that had a service for developers, so I was doing tech support directly for other developers, which felt very technically advanced, okay? Why then, when I looked at the work that the developers were doing in the same building, did I say, hey, I want to do that job? So here was the reason why staying in tech support was not great. One, and a big one, was infantilization. So at software companies, it is the support people who are, have their lunchroom breaks monitored, have their, the cleanliness of their desk monitored, have the sort of, they're infantilized, and it's not great, and it was painful for me, and it's painful for many other people working in tech support. In tech support, you tended to have a very broad scope with very little depth. So you touched on a lot of issues, you weren't very deep on a lot of issues. I also got pretty bored. I got very good at the moves that I had to do, and so I did get bored. And then the last factor of why this wasn't good for me was due to mental illness. And I'll get back to that mental illness point a little later about why I was motivated to move out. I don't list money on here because I rose pretty high in the tech support world. It was true that I got to a point in making money in tech support where I couldn't really leave the company I was at because I couldn't really make the same wage someplace else. So when I set out to try and learn how to, move into development, I really tried learning everything. I tried to grab little pieces of everything. And one important point here is it was 7-8 years ago, so the boot camp path really was not open to me. The boot camps that were available at the time were like, okay, you're going to have to move to San Francisco for like 3 months, not work, and pay us $8,000. And as somebody who already had a kid and was a sole wage earner for a family, I just wasn't able to do that. Just was completely out of the question. So kind of modern online boot camp stuff just wasn't available. There was self-taught stuff. There was plenty of material to teach yourself, and I tried to teach myself everything. I'm going to read this list. Unity 3D, or now just usually called Unity, Python, Java, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and the math programming language R. And this was a real mistake. This meant that when I really kind of said, hey, it's time for me to move, I need to find a full-time development job, I was going to have a harder path in front of me because I did not have a clear explanation of what it was that I could do. And, I wouldn't say that any of these was at the level where, it could be a huge part of my resume. If you put them all on there, it just sounded like you were not a real person. But really, the reason that set people off was not out of some aesthetic sense. It was, well, nobody, she can't know all of this well, right? So it must just be a passing acquaintanceship with some of this stuff. So that was something that I really did face. So my quest to get work, okay, I tried applying just sort of every listing I could see. I tried asking my friends to see if they would, help me get hired. I generally found they weren't crazy helpful for that. We'll kind of touch on why that might be later. I also tried applying to the place I was currently working, and I had a kind of wild interaction there where I was brought in. I was asked to do a coding challenge. I did it with, a senior developer. I asked a couple questions. I finished it in about 20 minutes. I was in the lunchroom a week later, and they're saying, oh my God, we had this guy in here who was amazing, solved this challenge in 8 minutes. And, I was totally new, right? I was green. So I just knew I wasn't going to get that job, right? If the issue was, could you solve it in 8 minutes versus 20 minutes, there was no way I was going to get that job. And at the time, it was very much a buyer's market. I had to fight hard to get that first position. And so this is a really critical piece of advice. The market is not now where it was then, and will not be in the future where it is now. So if you're trying to get advice from somebody who lived through very different market conditions for labor, you really want to be aware of that, because some of my advice where, talk about fighting, I don't mention how kind of hard I fought to get that first role, because currently the junior developers that I know do have an easier time getting interviews. In fact, somebody who I mentored got an interview with the very same team that I applied for all those years ago, and they are really welcomed on that team. Absolutely not getting the same kind of, oh, do this like you're a seasoned developer, to even get your foot in the door. So in the end, I did find someone to take a chance, and I started as a full-time developer. I took a small pay cut to do that first software development job. So I had some trouble in those roles as a software developer. So I started at that job. I was chugging along. I definitely was struggling to learn much. Sometimes I felt like I was really spinning my wheels. And then after 9 months, I left, ostensibly because I wanted to make more money. I'm going to turn my camera for a second in case you want to read the Simpsons quote. I left to make some more money at another role, like 10-15% more. And so I took another role at a different shop after 9 months, and I worked at that different shop for 2 weeks before they said, hey, you just don't have the skills that you need to do this job. So in trying to get a little bit more money, I ended up unemployed. So what was the root cause analysis of that? Should I have studied harder? Should I have worked harder? In the end, it really came back to my mental health. So a year or two later, when I'd been bouncing between jobs, I really got to, thinking about something like this, right? A common trauma response, someone who's had a traumatic childhood, is a high stimulus threshold, where safe, stable conditions feel understimulating and painfully boring. And that was something I was really dealing with, where I really had to look at twice. I'd sort of had a job that was good, was happy to have me employed for a year or two or way longer, but I just wasn't happy doing that. I was looking for the next kind of crisis and challenge. Even though I wouldn't say, hey, I want to be struggling, that was what my behavior was putting me in that situation. So then I spent a little while working right at the fringes of tech in the US, where, from being, a very comfortably middle-class person, I was pasting together multiple jobs. One interaction that stands out extremely well is, you want an experienced React developer for $20 an hour, and the response from the recruiter was like, yes, we do. Yes, that's right. That was rough. That was rough, right? And so I spent about a year. Now, when I mentor people, I say, this is the bad place. This is the bad outcome, is you're really struggling to paste together $40,000, $50,000 a year. Right, which obviously compared to, if you're working outside, or you're or you're working as a server, or you're working in a restaurant kitchen, this is going to be a lot easier way to make more money than that, right? So it wasn't bad in an absolute sense for sort of all the jobs you can have in the U.S. economy, but it was definitely a lot rougher, and I felt desperate a lot of the time. So I ended up getting several years in as a developer by hook and by crook after time, but eventually I had this moment where I said, I really need to figure out what I'm actually good at, and therefore what I want to do. And it turned out there was stuff that I had really missed about tech support. And one of the most significant things was I really liked the experience of connecting with people. I had known about roles in developer relations and developer evangelism for a long time, but I just had not pursued those roles. Another thing that I could have pursued, which just sort of wasn't exactly what I was interested in, was like solutions architect, where you're like doing development and support and sales all at the same time. Those were roles where you just got to be more in touch with people. You didn't feel so much isolated just working through a list of bugs, which it turned out hadn't worked super well for my personality. Once I switched to a role in developer relations, it took some time for that role to take off, but eventually I found a lot of success. I found myself published in multiple places. I was invited to conferences. I now have people just come to talk to me to say, hey, I want you to come be in this thing. And with that professional success, the money really followed with that professional success. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to change jobs or make threats to my current job or whatever else to try and get this 5% raise or whatever to get these incremental raises, by finding something that I was really good at that used the skills I had, then, being really well paid to do that sort of came naturally as part of that. So here are my lessons, if you're going to take lessons at all from a single point source. One is focus on one subject. And the second one is go to therapy. Those top two are the top two. Try those first. Do not change programming languages. Do not switch from being a web developer to a game developer before you've got your first role. Focus on one thing, and don't worry about whether or not it's the hottest thing in the world. Don't get too hung up on other people's advice. You want to do Python, do Python. You want to do JavaScript, do JavaScript. You want to do C#, do C#. And just stick in that language and in that framework as much as possible at first, because from there you'll have a basis to expand out. People will hire a great Python developer to work at their Rails shop because you are good. Okay, go to therapy, work on your stuff. Really can't recommend enough. Figure out what you're good at and take a good work match over a little bit more money. Really ask yourself, am I going to succeed here? Is this what makes a lot of sense? So that is my talk. Let me load up this last page. So again, my name is Nocnica. You can find me on Twitter at ServerlessMom. You can find me at Twitch at ServerlessMom. There's that little follow me button down at the bottom. And you can find this post as its own CodeLand post where you can see the slides and other notes. If you want career advice, especially if you represent an underrepresented group within tech, please get in touch with me. My DMs are totally open. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this talk. I hope you have a wonderful CodeLand.